Nanti 40 menitnya Dokter Linet itu dihitung pas mulai beliau ngomong. Ya, 40 menit kan jadinya, Miss. 45. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Please receive the warmest greetings from the Lampung province. Tabi pun. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for all the participants who've come and joined today's event. The 6th International Conference on Progressive Education 2024. This year, ICOP comes up with a theme about innovation and collaboration of education and technology for sustainable development in the digital era. And this very special event is held by the Faculty of Education and Teacher Training, FKIP Universitas Lampung. For this morning session, we will have two keynote speakers. The first one is Dr. Lynette Pretorius from Monash University, Australia. And the second one is Dr. Hamil Arhasaniko bin Mazlan from University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Malaysia. Before starting the first session, please allow me to introduce Dr. Lynette Pretorius as our first keynote speaker. She is an award-winning educator and researcher in the fields of academic language, literacy, research skills, and research methodologies. Dr. Lynette is the author of multiple journals articles and 2 academic books focused on the experiences of graduate research students in academia. She has qualifications in medicine, science, education, as well as counseling, and her research interests include structural education, academic identity, student well-being, AI literacy, and autoethnography. She is currently working on several major research projects, one of which is AI and epistemic justice, transforming higher education through AI literacy. Dr. Lynette is a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She received international honor from Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. And she also got an international honor awarded to educators who demonstrate an education through understanding and a strong commitment to teaching and learning approaches which foster high quality student learning. In 2022, she received prizes, including medals at the Dean's Award for Teaching Excellence. In Global Impact Grant, also, she received some prizes in the same year. So, in the first session, we will have 45 minutes for the first speaker to deliver the presentation, and then it will be continued by the second speaker, 45 minutes, and we will have 15 minutes for Q&A session. For all the participants, you can have or you can ask some questions later on the Q&A session. Well, is Dr. Lynette in the room already?
Yes, I am here.
Good morning, Dr. Lynette.
Hi.
It's nice to have you on this event.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone.
My pleasure. Okay, so I would like to give the floor for Dr. Lynette Pretorius from Monash University, Australia. Please, time is yours.
Great, thank you. Today I'm here to talk to you about my AI literacy work. And what I've decided to do is to sort of take you on the journey of how I developed AI literacy, and then from that, how I developed my AI literacy framework for other educators to use. So I'm just going to share my slides here, which looks like it's working. Yes. So as mentioned before, I'm from Monash University, which is in Australia. And so in Australia, we have the practice of acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are working and living, learning, and playing. And today I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I am on, which are the lands of the Bunurong people, and pay my respect to their elders. So today I'm going to talk about these things. I'm firstly going to highlight to you what generative AI actually is, and AI literacy, what it is and how you can develop, and how you can use generative AI in your writing and research. Also talk about some of the ethical issues that are associated with the use of generative AI, and how you should go about acknowledging the use of generative AI in the work that you do. And then finally, I will talk about the AI literacy framework, which I developed this year with one of my colleagues. So firstly, it is important to note that there is a difference between AI and generative AI. AI has been around for many years now, really for decades, and it is technology that mimics human intelligence. So these are things like grammar checking software, for example, autocorrect on your phone, Google Maps that takes you where you want to go, those sorts of things, right? And what they do is they use a range of methodologies, including machine learning, which is where they learn from large data sets, natural language processing, so that they can understand the words that you give them, the instructions that you ask them, and something called computer vision, which is based on visual inputs, so that they can understand the visual things they see. Generative AI, on the other hand, it does not just mimic human intelligence. More importantly, it mimics human creativity, which means that it can create new content, whereas AI itself was just giving answers to based on data sets, right? It was extrapolating on its data sets, but generative AI uses sophisticated algorithms and neural networks to learn from those big data sets, but then use that knowledge to create new and original works. And this means that they're not just replicating things, they can combine and reinterpret things in a novel way, producing creative output, which until basically the start of 2023, it was thought was only in the realm of humans' brains, but now computers can do that for us. And so this means that we need to learn how to harness this technology in our own practice and for our students. So as an introduction for you, I thought I'd highlight to you this. These are the ones that I use most often in my work. So I will also highlight to you all the pictures that are on my slides were generated with generative AI today. So you can see some of the things that the AI can do. So in my practice, I use some of Google's built-in AIs because at Monash, we use Google-based software for our email and our calendar and all these sorts of things. And Google has a lot of built-in AIs that auto-complete emails for me, those sorts of things. I use ChatGPT a lot. And I have a customized version of it, which means I trained it to answer and respond like I would respond based on my own work. This way I make it more useful for myself, and I'll talk more about that. I also use Grammarly, but the pro version, the paid version, and it is integrated into all my things. Leonardo AI is the thing that I use to create pictures, like the one that's on the screen there. And also DALL-E I sometimes use, and I will talk about DALL-E a little bit later. It is integrated into ChatGPT. I've recently also started using something called Notebook LM, which is from Google, and it is a generative AI that can create podcasts for documents. So I use it, for example, to create podcasts about my research, which I can then share my research more widely. Other ones that I use for research-based things include Otter AI, which is a transcription software, Alias, which is a thematic analysis tool, and then other things to search and find information, Claude and Perplexity and Consensus. They're different types of AIs. And then Elicit, which is a useful tool to extract information from papers. It can do a lot of literature review for you, really. So my journey with generative AI really started in 2021 already. So at this point in time, there were very, very basic generative AIs around. One of which went around at that time that you can use on your phone was called Dream. And you could create pictures by typing in some text and selecting some options. And I just thought, oh, I'll play with it and see what I did. So what I did is I took the title of the book that I wrote that year, and I just typed it into the thing, and I basically gave it no other instructions. And this is the picture that it came up with. And I was really quite impressed by the level of detail, but also it was actually really representing the content of my book. And I was quite surprised that software, I could just basically type in some words and I could create something like this, because as a person, I am not super artistic. I appreciate art, I just can't do it myself. And so this was very exciting for me because I could create this thing in collaboration with this AI and come up with wonderful things. And so this really sparked my interest in the field. And then, of course, ChatGPT was released, which came out at the end of 2022/start of 2023. And I thought, wow, this is mind-blowing. I can't even quite understand how it works. So I decided to play with it and just see what it did. And through this, I discovered that it is quite amazing. But it is really important to know how to use it properly, right? So this led me to become really interested in AI literacy. And I believe AI literacy is really a core attribute for everyone. I teach at a university, so I expect that all the students in the future, when they graduate, they need to know how to use these technologies in whichever discipline they are working in. But that also means that me, as the teacher of these students, need to know how to use these things. And so this led me to develop a definition of AI literacy, which was published early in 2023. And so you can see here the key concept here is knowing how to use the AI, but knowing how to work collaboratively with it and evaluate the results that you get, because you cannot guarantee that what it presents is actually true. It can make things up because, remember, it can be creative. So it can entirely fabricate answers if you don't know how to use it properly. So let's think a bit about how you can become what I like to call a prompt wizard. How can you use AI more effectively? And I'm going to do this by highlighting some of the things I learned over the last year or so. So firstly, my biggest tip to you is to give your AI a role. Now, this is because remember what a generative AI is, right? It has a massive, let's call it a brain behind it, with all of that data sets that it has looked at. And it's a massive space, and if you don't tell it where to go, it can pick anywhere in its data set to decide what answer to give you. Now, if you asked it, tell me if aliens are real, right? It could go to some conspiracy theorist website and give you one answer, or it can go to, I don't know, NASA's website and give you another answer, because you haven't told it where it's supposed to go. If you told it, act as a conspiracy theorist and tell me if aliens are real, you would have told them it where to go, and you will get much more restricted responses, things that you want. So this means that you need to tell it what sort of person it should be like. So, for example, I often say things like, act as a social science researcher or a teacher in inclusive education and do something for me. So I give it a role. So to illustrate this for you, this is the thing that was published as part of my AI literacy definition I talked about before. So this is me playing with ChatGPT way back in 2023. It is now much more advanced, but even at the way it was then, it was pretty impressive. So here you can see I said to it, act as a researcher and list the core concerns associated with doctoral education programs. And I decided to use this topic because it is something that I'm very knowledgeable about. So I thought that way I could evaluate how good it was at doing these sorts of things. And so this is what it gave me. And you can see this was in February 13, 2023. And I can tell you, as someone who is an expert in doctoral education research, it is correct. These are the main concerns in the doctoral education programs. So for me, that was quite impressive because I was thinking, well, okay, if I'm trying to research a field I know nothing about, this could actually be quite useful for me in figuring out some basic things and where to go. So this is why it is important to give it a role, to tell it what you want it to do very clearly and specifically. Which leads me to my next thing. You need to be very clear and specific. It needs to understand what you mean. And the easiest way to do that is to write really simple, clear sentences in very specific instructions. At the moment, it seems to work better at understanding positive instructions than negative instructions. So, for example, include these things. It seems to do better than saying, do not include these things. So think about how you phrase things. I imagine as the technology keeps evolving, it'll probably figure out how to do the negative things well in the near future. So, for example, these are the prompts that I use most often in my daily practice. Write this paragraph in less words. So I'd write that, and then I'd put quote mark, paste my paragraph, close quote mark, and then I get it to rewrite that paragraph in less words. This is important in my case because I do a lot of qualitative research, and qualitative research is a lot of words, but journal articles often have a very restricted word count. So I need to find the way to say the thing I want to say in less words, and the AI can help me do that. One thing that is very useful is getting it to tell you how to further improve text. For example, this is my paper about this topic. How can I further improve it? It is very good at giving you suggestions. It is also very good at helping you think more deeply about things. So if you are reading something, or if you've written something and you want some feedback, asking it to give you some critical thinking questions about the text is very useful because it acts as a way for prompt you to think, oh, that's a good question. I should really answer that in my writing. Or, oh, that's an interesting thing. I should go read this paper in more detail to understand it. And I also tend to write this text in a more conversational tone because I do have a blog where I talk about my research and I need to find a way to say it in more everyday English than my fancy academic paper. And so AI helps me do that. But you can see these are very specific, clear instructions, short sentences telling it exactly what I want it to do. Here is an example of what it can do with language. So one of the things generative AIs are very good at is language because they're large language models. So they understand how language works, particularly English, but some of them are also very good in other languages. ChatGPT is quite good in quite a lot of languages now. So here you can see technical paragraphs that I got from my paper, and I told it to write it in a more conversational tone for my blog post. And then many months later, I took my conversational thing and put it back in to ask it to write it in an academic tone because I was interested to see what it did. And so you can see how it's taken the same content and it's just written it in a fancier way. So it is very good at helping improve quality of writing. And this can also be a great way for you to learn to improve your language because it shows you the changes that it's made. And this means that you need to provide it with context. Tell it where to go, what it is you want from it, be specific and clear, and give it that context and narrow focus. So here I've taken that list of things and I said, okay, what I wanted to do is create for me a research question for a qualitative research study. And that's what it did. It took the many things it listed in the previous example and narrowed it down into this question and given a reason for why this was the question that it came up with. And this was, not bad, but it's a very big question and there's no way you can do research that would answer all of those questions. So I needed it to be focused. So I asked it to focus specifically on only one thing. In this case, I picked mental health in the doctoral program. And so now you see it's reshaped that research question into something related to mental health and well-being, which is now much more focused and because I've given it the context that I wanted to do. And then here you see I have made it even more focused. So in PhD level research, you need to incorporate theory into your study and into your questions. So what I've then said is I further narrowed down the context to say focus on mental health, but specifically incorporate this one theory, which is theory from Foucault. And you'll see that what it's done is it's completely rearranged the way the sentence is asked, because it's now using words from Foucault's theory, which is discourse and constructed and negotiated, those sorts of things. So this has helped me to get a much more useful question out of ChatGPT, because I gave it the context and the instructions it needed to know what I actually wanted from it. Now, one piece of advice I would give you is play an experiment. The technology changes on a daily basis, really. Like every couple of weeks, ChatGPT releases a new model, does new things. All sorts of new AIs are created daily. If you go on the internet and ask for a list of AIs, you can get thousands of them. So go out and play an experiment with the ones that exist. See the ones you like. Maybe you like the ones I use. Maybe you don't. Maybe there are other ones that work better for you. There are many out there, and find the ones that work for you, and then experiment with how to do things within those AIs so that you can use them effectively. So one thing that I did was I decided to experiment with the students I had to see whether I could use AI as a data generation tool. Because I had this experience of creating the picture for my book, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And as you would have heard earlier, one of my research areas of interest is called autoethnography. It's a research methodology that explores personal experience. And I teach a unit that actually teaches students how to do this. And because autoethnography is quite a touchy-feely unit, it's got a lot of like emotions and often incorporates creative things like artworks and poems and these sorts of things. I thought, oh, I know, I can see if I can use some of these AIs for my students to help them develop these more artistic things, because maybe like me, they're not as artistic. And so that's what I did. I created this example for them. I showed them, let's say I was doing an autoethnography of my academic identity. I would create a picture of who I am as a teacher and as a researcher using AI, and then explore that in my project. And I taught this to my students, going through how I did it in the AI, the different pictures that I came up with, how I revised it, and so forth. And these are the two pictures that I ended up generating. So teacher on the left, researcher on the right, which I think is quite great, right? They are wonderful pictures, but they took a bit of time to get to, and this helped me to show them how you can use artwork as a way to explore your own experiences. So for example, the background is quite, these old universities, very big old school buildings. I made it make those things because initially the picture was all like modern and new. And in my head, I sort of see academia as a more old school institution. And so this was quite exciting for the students. It also revealed some interesting things, because some of the pictures that the AI generated were a little bit dodgy. And we talked about that and what that meant, and think about the ethical implications of using these sorts of things. But it prompted the students to be more brave, more creative in their own work, because they could see how I did these sorts of things. Now, I also said to you before, be clear and specific and give it short instructions. If you are trying to make it do really complex things, it is better to split the tasks into smaller tasks. So instead of telling it, write this whole introduction of this paper for me, if you ask it to write this one paragraph about a topic, it will be much more effective. One thing that I also played and experimented with was to see whether I could use it as a data analysis tool. And I'm going to use this as showing you the instructions, because what I did is I did big qualitative study. It has 40 hour-long surveys and 21 hour and a half long interviews. So it's a massive data set, and I want to analyze the data. So if I just put the transcript in and say, analyze this thing, it could come up with all sorts of things. I don't know what it's going to focus on, and I wanted to make sure that it did something clear and precise. So I developed a series of data analysis questions, so prompts for the ChatGPT AI to use. And I developed a series of 31 of them. And what I did is I took each transcript and I asked the same questions for each of them individually, so one at a time. So this is what I mean by splitting those complex tasks into smaller ones. These are some of the example prompts that I use. I highlight to you they are very specific and detailed. So for example, the third one has definitions of specific things I wanted to look at because I'm giving it context and clarity as to what I wanted to do. And as an example, this is one of the responses it gave. So you can see that it's actually really good at doing data analysis. But what is really quite interesting is that it's very good at not just understanding things that are clearly written in the transcripts. It can actually make judgments and connect ideas that are not necessarily said, but that could mean something. So you can see this in the example I've got down the bottom there. It's like, these are nuanced indications that could be interpreted as. So it is thinking, really, right? It is trying to connect ideas in novel and interesting ways. So if you can work with it, you can get some really impressive responses from it. One pro tip that I would give you is get the AI to explain what it did. This helps you to sort of understand its way of thinking, but also it helps you improve your own skills. So firstly, it's important to know that no one actually really knows how the generative AIs think. They have a data set and they've got all sorts of algorithms and things, but the actual decision making they go through to give you an answer, no one actually knows how that works because, remember, by this stage, it's now thinking for itself, right? It was trained before and it's now creating and combining things in new and innovative ways for itself. So getting it to explain is often very useful. So here you can see an example. I got some text and I got the AI to fix the grammatical issues in the English in the left, and you can see the right one is the formal version that it's fixed. So this is very useful, and if you're trying to make your writing better, obviously that's good. But what would be more useful is if you can also think, okay, in the future, what can I do not to make these mistakes again? So I asked it to explain why it made the changes that it did. And these are some of the suggestions that it gave. So for example, it tells me it corrected grammatical errors like subject-verb agreement. So now I can see, okay, next time I write, I should avoid subject-verb disagreement with examples like the examples it's given here. Similarly, verb tense, punctuation, all these sorts of things. It explains in detail, often with lots of examples, to explain to you how to fix the thing next time as well. So this way it's a learning tool for you as well, right? And it also helps you see its structure. So if you ask it to write additional paragraphs or explain its reasoning, it can give you a lot more insight into why it's suggesting whatever it is that it is suggesting. And then there's the issue of ethics. So I wonder how many people have actually properly thought about the ethical issues that surround the use of AI. Because it's kind of cool. It does a lot of really fancy things, right? So as long as you don't steal stuff, it's probably fine. That's what most people think. And I mean, that's of course true, but there are additional ethical impacts that people have not necessarily considered that I'd like to talk to you about. So for example, I've worked with some colleagues and we've developed a series of ethical principles to help you use the technology ethically. And we've gone with an acronym ethical. So that's where these things in the boxes come from. Firstly, examining policies. So different countries, different institutions within a country, etc., all have their own policies and procedures on what it is that you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to use it. So you need to examine those policies to ensure that you are doing what your context expects of you. For example, in the UK, because of some of the privacy laws they have with technology, there are additional compliance measures that people have to put in place if they use the AIs. So in addition to that, you need to think, okay, I need to know how to use the technology, sure, so that I could get some answers. But you also need to know actually how to protect it. So how do you ensure that you don't have unauthorized people accessing the stuff you put in there? How do you ensure privacy? What about intellectual property and integrity? Think about these sorts of things, right? Because some AIs, not all of them, but some of them, for example, would take everything you put in and use it to train their AIs further and make them even better, right? Which you may not care about, but if, for example, you've got sensitive data, you don't want that sensitive data to be part of the AI model. So you need to think about these sorts of things, right? One thing that people don't really consider is the social impacts, particularly the digital divide. So it is increasingly clear from the research that people who know how to use the AIs well excel at using them and use them very effectively and get a lot out of them. But those who don't necessarily know how to use them or use them well, or those who don't really have access to the technology to begin with, they are actually falling further and further behind. So by using the technology, if as a teacher you don't ensure that all the students, for example, have equal access to the technology and all of them know how to use it, you would actually be making that social inequality worse. So you need to think about if you're going to use this in your classroom, which I encourage you to do, but if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that everyone will be able to actually access it and use it effectively. One thing that almost no one thinks about is sustainability. That is because these technologies use an enormous amount of power, electricity, right? They are run from massive data centers all around the world, many of them say in the US, for example. And this means that it requires a lot of energy to get an answer. So there's research recently that showed that to generate one picture with, I think it was DALI they used, it uses the same amount of energy as to charge your smartphone fully. So that means if you're creating 100 pictures a day, like you are using a lot of energy. So thinking about how you use it, using it most effectively so that it is not wasting energy, but also using it in a way that reduces your efforts in other spaces so that it balances out the ecological footprint that you leave. Then there is the output. It is important to realize that it can make up things, right? And we've talked about that before. But in addition to that, it also is a thing that uses the data it has to come up with answers, right? And that means that it's been trained on a data set that includes human biases. So there, you can see this in some of the research out there. For example, when they ask it to draw a picture of a maths teacher, it always draws an old man. And if you ask it to draw a picture of a nurse, it's almost always a pretty woman, right? So that's clearly a bias in the data set that's come forth. And as the researcher or the user, when you are using the technology, you need to be aware of the biases that could exist, which means that you need to be always evaluating the output you get from it to ensure that it is actually conveying what you want it to convey and that you are not perpetuating any of those biases that exist. Additionally, it is also important to indicate how you've used it. So this is an academic integrity thing. So if you were writing an essay at university, you would, have your references to say where things come from, because you are distinguishing between your ideas and the ideas of someone else. This is the same for acknowledgement of AI use, right? You need to acknowledge between your ideas and the ideas of something else in this case. It fosters trust and credibility that you have been open and honest about what you did. So there are different people with different opinions, but in general, these are the things that an AI acknowledgement should include. So an explanation of which specific AI you used, details about what you used it for, sometimes including the prompts, depending on what it is that you're doing. Clarification of what you did when you got the answers, how you evaluated it, maybe changed it, etc. And then a statement at the end that says you take responsibility for the final version that's in this thing that you produced. So this is an example of one that I give to my students and I use in my own papers. So you can see I acknowledge that I used ChatGPT, so specific detail of the AI. I explain what I used it for. When I was preparing my manuscript, I used it to help refine my phrasing and reduce my word count. And then I say what I did with it. Well, the output was then adapted to reflect my own style and voice, and also as peer review happened. And so then at the end, I take responsibility for the final version that's in this document. And you will see these sorts of statements get published now in journal articles. This is one of my journal articles published at the start of this year. And if you scroll down to the acknowledgements, you will see this statement there. So these are now quite commonplace in academic research across many fields. And then you also need to think about, if you go back to that access I talked before to protect privacy, one thing that you should do is try and access versions that are protected, that won't use your data. Now, this can be problematic because some of them cost a lot of money. For example, I've got a grant to use the ChatGPT version I'm using because it is actually quite expensive. But other ones aren't, and there are ones that are free that you can just tick a box if you don't want people to take your data. So think of which ones are the best to use what it is that you want to do. And then finally, commit to keeping up and continuously educating yourself. This is because the things change all the time. I've already mentioned this to you. And if you don't, you're going to fall behind. The adage that people now have, so initially when it came out, people thought, oh no, AI is going to take my job, right? But what people say now, it's not actually AI that's going to take your job. It's the person who knows how to use AI that will take your job, because they can do your job better and more effectively than you can by yourself. So keep up with the technology and keep educating yourself. And this comes down to that developing AI literacy for yourself. So I'm going to talk to you about what are the components of AI literacy. So what I did with my colleague is we explored our own experiences, like the ones that I've just told you about, and analyzed the commonalities that we found. And we found that AI literacy has 5 components. Firstly is the foundational level, which is basically knowing what an AI is and how to use it, right? So knowing where to go to find ChatGPT, how to log in, how to ask it a question. You can't do anything else if you don't know that. But then you need to move beyond that. You need more conceptual understanding. So this involves knowing what to do with the output it gives you. So taking that output, finding the information you want, getting the answer you want, evaluating it, maybe using some of it, maybe not using other parts of it, and repurposing it for your specific purpose. And then we found that for someone to actually be properly AI literate, you need the next step, which is the social element. So this is knowing how to collaborate with the AI as a partner. So moving beyond seeing it just as a technology that just does some stuff for you, and working with it more like thinking of it as an assistant Like if you're doing research, a research assistant, right? It's helping you get the things, do the things. And if you can learn how to collaborate with it, like you are almost talking to a fellow colleague, right? That's when you become really AI literate, because you can use it effectively to create the actual content that you want to create. Additionally, ethics is important. So you need to learn how to be an effective digital citizen to be able to use these technologies well. And knowing what is good about them, what is bad about them, how you can leverage the good and minimize the bad, etc. And then lastly, emotional aspect is really important. This is because our feelings about technology underpin everything when we try and use it. So if we're scared of the technology, if we think it's going to take our job, for example, we are much less likely to engage with it in an open and fun, experimental way. We are scared of it, right? If we think, wow, this is the greatest thing ever, then we may not consider some of those issues that are associated with it. So we need to be aware of our emotions and how they influence the way we use things so that we can use them effectively. And so what we did is we put this into a framework, which you can see here. So the foundational element at the bottom, knowing how to use the technology, the conceptual element, learning how to find, use, and repurpose the information for your specific purpose. The social element, learning how to actually collaborate with it as a partner rather than as a tool. Being a good digital citizen, and being aware of our socio-emotional influences and how this impacts our use of technology. So this particular framework we have made available free to access for everyone, because it has been very popular, because there has not really been anything about it in the literature to date. But one thing that we found is that there are some other scholars in the world elsewhere who've developed frameworks that are actually quite similar. So our concepts seem to be aligning with what other people think AI literacy is. So think about these things in your own practice so you can make sure that you develop that AI literacy. And then lastly, I thought I'd share some new and research that's still in peer review, where I took the concept of developing AI literacy a little bit further, and I helped my students develop their AI literacy through experience. So what I got is my PhD students to write this paper together. They reflected on their use of AIs, which one they use, how it helps them, etc. And in that process, we've been able to show that actually if you encourage AI use in a responsible manner, you teach AI literacy, AI can actually act as a way to decolonize academia, give access to knowledge to people who have previously been hindered. For example, all of us on this paper were not native English speakers. So being able to communicate in an English-speaking academia can be quite challenging. But if you've got this technology to help you do that, that gives you access to academia, right? This allows ideas that may never have been heard before because it was only spoken in another language to be shared with the wider global community. This democratizes knowledge. In addition to that, we also found that using AI can help students navigate hidden messages within academia in this case. So learning how academia actually works. If you've never been a PhD student before and you don't know how things work, you can ask ChatGPT to tell you, how do I do this? It is actually quite helpful in helping students socialize into academia. And so in this way, we believe that developing AI literacy and encouraging its responsible use will actually improve the culture of academia longer term and create a place where innovation and equity can coexist. So I have made all of my research freely available on YouTube. So you can just search for my name on YouTube. You will see there is a playlist of AI literacy videos. These have increased since I've taken this screenshot. There are many of them now. So if there is anything that you would like to reflect on again later, you can just go and search for my name and look at the video again. And so that's the end of my presentation. And I am happy to answer any questions in the 5 or so minutes before the next person comes up, I think.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lynette, for the fruitful presentations. Everybody, please give a big applause for Dr. Lynette Pretorius from Monash University, Australia. I can tell that the presentation she just delivered can relate to all of us as educators here. And yes, we are going to continue the presentation for the second keynote speakers. However, for all the participants, both online and offline, if you have questions for Dr. Lynette, I think you can type it first on the chat box. And then later on, the committee will randomly choose one question, and then we will give it to, or we will ask to Dr. Lynette in the discussion session later after the second presentation. Is that fine, Dr. Lynette?
Yes, that is fine.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll continue to the second presentation. But before we go to the presentation, or before starting the presentation, I'd like to introduce and read the curriculum vitae from Dr. Kamil Arhasa Niko bin Mazlan. He's a distinguished lecturer at University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Faculty of Music and Performing Arts. He is a specialist in music education. His educational background includes a diploma and bachelor's degree in music from Aswara and a master's and PhD in music education from UPSI. A committed educator and researcher who has made substantial contribution to music education, jazz studies, and guitar. Some research that he has already done, such as model pelancongan budaya berteraskan seni persembahan, and then kajian semakan semula pelaksanaan latihan mengajar di UPSI in 2024. And he also has published some journal articles in performing arts in the landscape of culture tourism. In 2024, musical innovation, the fusion of chord melody style and Malay traditional music lagu Melayu asli in 2024. And he also received some award internationally. The first one is he got gold medal in the Interactive Virtual Reality Music Appreciation Innovation Technology Expo in 2023. And second award, international award, he got silver medal in Fundamental of Jazz Guitar Reharmonization Techniques in 2023. Is Dr. Hamil here already? Hello, Dr. Kamil. It's nice to have you on our...
Hello. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, clearly. We can hear your voice clearly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give the floor for Mr. Kamil Arhasniko bin Mazlan from University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Malaysia. Time is yours.
All right, thank you, moderators. Before that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and peace be upon all. Good day, esteemed college, distinguished guests, and all the attendants. I am truly honored to be here at the 6th International Conference on Progressive Education. My heartfelt gratitude goes to the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education in Lampung University for the invitation and the opportunity to engage in such inspiring community of educators, researchers, and innovators. So today, before we start our sharing session, I would like to ask all of you a very simple question on this is from Alvin Toffler, sharing about the illiterates of 21st century. So the idea is not the main thing that we need to be concerned is not about read and write, but the idea of who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Before we going into deeper, what do you think about this concept? mind to share, everyone? What do you think about this concept? And to add up, may I know how many of you are using iPhones? You can share in the chat if you want to.
For all the online participants, maybe you can
Yeah.
respond to Dr. Hamil through the chat
How
box.
many, yeah, how many of you are using iPhones? And how many of you are using Android? Okay, I got one answer. May I
I
know why and what are the reason you are using iPhone? Miss Rafisita?
Miss Ravista says, I use iPhone. Okay, how about the others?
Okay, apart from that, may I know why using iPhone? You see, just now we learned about unlearn, relearn, and about the theory of Alvin Toffler. If you go back to the theory itself, the concept, you see this is all my gadgets are Apple, are easy to connect. Okay, thank you. Because sometimes when we talk about education, there are several issues where it's not about the technology much, but it's about how we think on the technology and the usage for the technology. Same goes to the issues on, um, like I asked just now, using iPhone or maybe Android. See, sometimes we have these issues of learn and then to unlearn and also to relearn. For example, like some of us might use iPhone to get updated, some or maybe because of the trend. But if you look closely in the context of education, sometimes we have these issues of comfort in what we are doing. So in order to have that, that's why I come up my discussion first is on how to change our mind, because the mind itself is very important. Apart from we have all these gadgets and it keep evolving over the years, but somehow sometimes our mindset are not evolving together with the technologies. So these some of the theories or model about learn, relearn, and unlearn. Before we are going in specifically in the context of my research, I would like to share this idea, which is sometimes we need to take time to think of how can we refine our education pedagogy, PCK, or pedagogy content knowledge for the better futures, because the learners in the futures will much more differ comparing to the learners before it. And another part is it about this traditional and modern pedagogy approach. If you look closely, some of us in teaching and learning are choosing much more lecture rather than to give the learners their own time to learn. For example, if we have class today and we take the approach of lecturing much comparing to record the lecture and let the student read before the class, what we call as flipped classroom. So these kind of ideas sometimes is not coherent with the current situation when we teach in regardless of primary, secondary, and tertiary level. Next, I would like to share with you on if we can outline on this table is about the comparing specifically field in music education. If you look at music education, personally, globally, the way we teach, we're still using quite conventional approaches that have been used for many, many years, what we call as teacher and apprentice model. This kind of model have been embedded in many years from previous years until now. Because of that, sometimes it makes the student diluted in the context of how they can have their own voice in teaching of learning. Because all these incorporate, like for example, like competency-based education. It's supposed to be the student-centered. And sadly, it's also happened in the context of music education, which is sometimes the educator or maybe the instructor are giving a specific content to the student to learn. So this hinder a lot of what we call as flexibility for the student, and also it taking much time to learn about the content, comparing to discuss what are the issue in teaching and learning, especially in music education. From there, you see, if you look at this, the trend of online music learning, this the data, you can see it will be like expanding for the future. For example, like how the industrial context and the higher education can merge around to upgrowth the using of global and online context. So the trend are growing, and next you see a part of it. There's a few issues that I'm discussed to you about the introduction, some challenges, and you might wonder about what's next. So in order to cope all these issues, like me myself, I'm always curious about why I'm using Google, and why, for example, we are searching for an answer in Google, and why sometimes when we teach, we are replicating how we learn before this rather than to understanding the learner's stuff. So because all these issues, this is where I'm thinking learning and the analogy of eating a cake. So we're not going to eat the whole cake. So at the first place, why we cut the cake into pieces? And so this is the idea of bite-sized learning. Because in order to have, we have a lot of digital, yes, but to begin with, first we need to understand that in the online context, our focus span is very short. So in order to cater the focus span, this is where our strategy needs to be changed. Because sometimes some of it, some of the video are explaining very lengthy, rather than focusing on what are the main point of some of the subject that we learn. So to try out these ideas, so this is the framework of what me and my colleagues agree on. What we look as the bite-sized approach is supposed to be pragmatic, brevity, personalized, and flexible. Okay, why? Because this, when I have that idea of bite-sized learning, this is where I putting my content much very short. So this is my content. I have it just reharmonization technique, and I put it into a videos. What kind of videos? Later on, I will show you why. So this is the platform that I use, TikTok. So you can see in this graph, the use of TikTok is also a part of why it's aligned with the concept of bite-sized learning. Because when you look or access the TikTok, much of the video are very short. So from there, I got my content, which is the basic just reharmonization technique. the education context of approach, bite-sized learning approach, and authoring system, which is TikTok. Boom. What will it be? This is the account of my TikTok. So in this account, I put all my 8 content precisely and very short. The shortest, if I'm not mistaken, of my hand only on the certain topic. Okay, apart from that, what feedback do I have right after I uploading all the content? If you can see, there's a few emerging themes. For example, like appreciation of educational content. First of all, we need to understand that not all of the learners um, have the benefit to learn in higher educations, particularly in this context of jazz guitar. So from there, a part of that team, I also got much of positive comment, especially some of them, they have their prior knowledge, but right after they watch the video, the knowledge that they have is expanding. So we can see clearly there is a constructive context of the knowledge. And also an element of SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, or these are lifelong learning. So some of my audience, they are quite, I'm not saying old, I love to use the word veterans. So when they watch the video, it keep them to learn more, to understand more about basic jazz reharmonization techniques. Apart from that, I also have some comment to further, for example, like some of them asking me about do I make private class, so on and so forth. And also there also a discussion with me and some of the follower. So from here, why I'm using this? This is, if you look at the trend of collaborating the data from 2019 to 2021, this is a huge upgrowth trend on how the use of learnings and some of the private sectors. So to conclude, the technology will be evolving. Seems like the first question I asked all of you about why we are using iPhone, because sometimes some of us using digital, but we are not using it to maximize the usage of why we are choosing certain thing. Same goes to how we think. To take the most simple analogy, we are not going to eat rice every day, because some of the day we might change our menu. Same how we think. Because without the traditional, it won't have what we call as the modern approach. And also sometimes, yes, we have a lot of digital tools out there, yes, but you cannot teach it like how you are normally teach. For example, like classical training method, which is focusing on the lecture. Yes, you can use lecture, but sometimes you need to cut out the lecture, because research has shown that in the context of learning online, the focus span is very short. In recent research 2023, it says that in the use of some of the learners are giving comments saying that the shorter time will be better. Some of it suggest like 10 minutes, and some of it suggest 5 minutes. It depends on the learners. And lastly, like I mentioned before this, the lifelong learning, because learning is not about age, it's about the curiosity in ourselves. When we have that curiosity, it will spark the ideas of what we're going to learn. Same goes like how it's today. We are using an online platform to share globally. But apart from that, we need to get through first to understand, okay, if this is a technology, we need to be prepared overhands about, for example, like the line, so on. And that's all for me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamil. Everybody, please give a big applause for Dr. Kamil Arhasad Niko from University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Malaysia. What I can conclude from what he was saying or delivering to us is that we need to integrate the traditional to be a modern pedagogy approaches. I mean, like we have to embrace the technological information innovation as we are living in the digital era. So we all, as educators, need to be very creative, I think, to create a better learning environment. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think now we will open for the discussion session, question and answer. So for the online participants and the offline participants who are now in the ballroom, you may ask questions to our speakers and please address to whom you'd like to ask. Because we have two keynote speakers today, right? Yes. Yes, please don't forget to mention your name and which institution you are coming from. Please.
Should I stand up?
Sure, why not?
Good morning, Dr. Lynette and Dr. Kamil. My name is Fitri. I am the master degree program of Lampung University taking English education. So my first question will go to Dr. Lynette. Um, that was a very interesting presentation. And after hearing your presentation, I would like to categorize myself as illiterate AI. But the question is, I would like to ask about mental health, well-being, and also the using of AI. Um, about the generative AI that you have mentioned, that it could mimicking human creativity, it's really interesting for me. But in the case of the auto-ethnography that you say about a personal experience, I find in my class, most of the students of the master degree use AI, not generative AI, still the old one AI, to answer questions for the examination. And unfortunately, the professor doesn't know because the question was given through the cell phone. And I think it's another major issue. And the second one is about mental health and AI. One of my friends is very literate in AI. She even create website for her teaching. She is a very senior teacher. But then once she told me that I couldn't teach if there is a blackout. And I was surprised because she was one of the best teacher in her school. Why? I say, because I put all my materials in my website, and if I couldn't open it, I cannot teach. So it gives me another perspective that it's really dangerous for people who are dependent too much. I think AI is creating dependent emotional feeling. And I think it's not good for us as a teacher because we have to be able to teach in any kind of situation. So my question is, to what extent should we depend ourselves to AI? And how could we limit ourselves not to be too much dependent to AI? And my last question is, I'm pursuing doctoral degree in Monash education, specifically in teaching method. I
Amin.
love to be able to continue my doctoral degree there. That's my dream.
Amin.
But I'm illiterate AI, so it gives me a scare feeling. How should I prepare myself when I continue my study there? I think it's going to be major problems for me. Could you give me suggestion, probably, Dr. Lynette, how to prepare myself? And one question for Dr. Camille. Dr. Camille, thank you for your your interesting presentation. To be honest, I am writing my thesis about Suggestopedia. That's a teaching method combining with music, classical music. And this is proven that the students are really interested in the lesson. They keep their focus more than conservative ways. So my question is, Dr. Kamil, could you give us more tips in how we can combine music or songs probably in our teaching method in the classroom, specifically state classroom? How can we make it more interesting? Thank you, Dr. Lynette and Dr. Camille. It's my great honor and pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Fitri, for the questions. Okay, I'll give the floor to Dr. Lynette first.
Sure. So there are lots of questions. I think the first question is similar to the question that was in the chat. It relates to the use of AI with integrity, right? So it is clear that those who don't know how to use the technology well tend to use it as a easy access answer to things. They kind of use it like Google. And you can type into Google, what is this, and copy and paste, right? And you can do the same thing with, say, ChatGPT. It's just that ChatGPT's answer is often a lot more fancy sounding, and so therefore convincing, and students use them. I think it is important to realize that there, firstly, is no point in banning the AI because, one, it can't be detected if people use it anyway because it creates unique new knowledge, right? So it is not actually something that can be detected by some software because it's something new. It's not been copied and pasted and anything like that. And two, in the future, it will be part of everything we do. It is already part of lots of what we do. You don't even realize how pervasive it really is. So what is more important is to learn how to use it to advance knowledge further. Yeah. So I think of it like, I'm very nerdy. My biggest favorite show is Star Trek. And in Star Trek, they always talk to the computer and they say, computer, do this. And then they take whatever the computer does and they build on that to, solve some complex problem. And I think that is in reality where we're going. So what we need to do is teach students how to use it well. So they're not using it as a copy-paste sort of situation, but rather as a way to advance their knowledge. And that necessitates that we need to change our assessment tasks because our assessment tasks are often based on measuring final answer, not the process of learning. And we need to change that because in the future, if you go and work somewhere, you're not analyzed on your final product. You're analyzed all the way through on how you use all the things in the company to do the thing that you're supposed to do, right? The second question is related to dependence. And yes, it is true that some people become over-dependent on technology. And of course, if electricity goes out and no internet exists, we're going to have a problem. But then at the same time, I think, once again, it's going to be part of everything in the future. So we need to learn how to be not dependent on it, but at the same time know that we're going to use it and how to use it well and what to do if it breaks, because it's a piece of technology and technology always breaks. So we need to find some sort of middle ground there. In terms of the PhD at Monash, if you're coming to Monash Education, you will see me lots because I teach the PhD at Monash many things. In terms of preparing for it, I would suggest to you that AI literacy is something new for everyone because generative AI came out at the start of 2023. People are still trying to figure out what it is and how it works. So don't feel bad if you consider yourself, like you said, illiterate. you will learn through the process of using it and getting better at it, just like I did. But in terms of the process itself, prepare your proposal. And as you are preparing your proposal and, you know, developing your research project with your proposed supervisors, see what the technology can do for you. If you're trying to improve your paragraph, maybe ask ChatGPT to help and see what it can do and how it can help you make those things better. That would be my answer to your 3 questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lynette. Does it answer your questions, Ms. Fitri? Okay, we hopefully that you will be a part of Monash University someday. Yeah. All right. For the next question, I think Dr. Kamil, please.
Yes, Assalamualaikum. Thank you. A very good question. My comments or my suggestion, first of all, whatever we do, we need to understand the learners first. For example, some of the learners might like visual, some do like kinesthetics, and some might like auditories. So, before whatever we do, like myself, um, how I'm use the technology in my teaching, I will upload all my content in our learning management system, or sometimes I use Google Classroom. So I synthesize everything and put in the notes. So when, for example, today is the class, I will attend the class face to face, or maybe I will ask the student, okay, do you have class or you want to make it online or offline? You choose. Because for me, both, I can agree with both. For example, like if I have my face-to-face classes, I already upload my content of the teaching in the system. So the student will have time to read if they want to read. Because some of the students, they don't even log in to like Google Classroom or maybe the learning management system. So it is my task to remind them if they are, and then I give them a chance to choose. Okay, which one you prefer? You want me to explain the text for you, or you want me, because I like the context of storytelling in teaching rather than focusing on the slide. First of all, because I have read through all the slide, and then from there I want to have more engagement with my students. So from there, they get the ideas of why you are learning something. Because some of the students sometimes they might not understand why you need to learn this, why you need to learn that. So the other question about to integrating the music also depends on what kind of the learners that you have. Because sometimes some of the learners are like to have a lot of rhythms, but some of the song that have a very fast tempo or fast rhythm, you need to be careful on the lyrics, because some of the lyric might eventually unconsciously embed you with some thoughts of negativities. For example, you can listen to a lot of 60s, 40s pop songs, because the lyric is quite, it's not strictly, but it's when you analyze it explicitly, you can see that there is a double meaning in those kind of lyrics. So the song itself is also depend on the learners. So I hope this will give you some ideas in how to utilize in the context of your teaching or maybe your learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamil. Ms. Fitri? Okay, are you satisfied enough with the answer? All right, thank you. Let's continue this discussion by reading one of the questions from the chat room. I think all of us can check it together. A question coming from Rizwanto. Thank you, Dr. Lynette Pretorius. I am Rizwanto, a lecturer at Universitas Muhammadiyah Metro Lampung, Indonesia. My question is, how can an AI literacy framework in higher education ensure that the use of generative AI supports academic originality and integrity while addressing algorithmic bias and fostering deep ethical understanding among students, especially in research contexts that require complex interpretation and cultural nuance? Okay, for Dr. Lina, time is yours.
Well, So in addition to what I said previously about the use of the technology with integrity, the framework itself is designed as a way for both teachers and students to develop their understanding of how the technology works, right? And so this necessitates that as teachers, we do this ourselves, but then as teachers, we also help our students learn these things. That requires us actually explicitly teaching them about things like algorithmic bias, which is something I did when I was talking about those pictures of me. I talked about some of that issues there. And in terms of all the other ethical issues that I talk about, as we teach our students, we need to also talk about these things. And the evaluation component of it is particularly important for that interpretation and nuance, because understanding that, there's nuance in most things are not black and white. As researchers, when you want to use this technology, you have to know how to not just accept everything the way it is, always evaluate it, change it as is necessary for your particular purpose, and use it as a collaborative partner, but not as someone who does the work for you, because that's not what it does. It just presents some text. You have to decide what to do with that text as the researcher or as the teacher teaching the student how to do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lynette. One more question coming from Ms. Rafista, but I think it's clearly answered already in the chat room. Should we still ask it to Dr. Lynette, Ms. Rafista? Okay, clear. Well, we're opening for one more questions for students or for participants, who are in the ballroom. Anyone want to ask a question? Okay, one question. Don't forget to mention your name and the institution you're coming from.
Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hello, my name is Ratna Yuningsi. I come from Universitas Lampung atau Lampung University. So, what I want to ask is, in the context of using generation AI, how can we assess the reliability and validity of the information generated by AI? Because in several cases or experience when I personally use AI and I ask for source of or reference, but we went double checks and turned out source were invalid.
Okay,
Thank you.
let me
Assalamualaikum
clarify.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So the question goes to Dr. Lynette.
Yes. Yeah, so that's a common experience. The generative AIs are quite well known for what they call hallucinating references. This is something that ChatGPT, the people who made it, OpenAI, say they are fixing at the moment. But at the moment still, it makes up references. And this is going back to what I talked about before. It mimics creativity, right? So if you ask it, tell me a reference, right? It can tell you a real reference, or it can tell you a completely fake reference, because it can just make it up if you want to, if you don't tell it to. So, I mean, in reality, the only way that you can evaluate that is to know about the content yourself, right? So if you are looking for answers about things, take what that says, but then go and do further research about it, like you did when you looked for the reference and you found that it didn't exist. Do those sorts of things. That means you are, in fact, evaluating the information that's coming from there, right? It is likely, when you're asking it those sorts of questions, usually the content is actually pretty accurate. It's the references that it makes up. And this is because of the way the academic publishing system works and some references being behind paywalls, so it can't access it even though it can access the internet. So it just makes up some stuff, right? But the content is usually fairly good, but you usually have to think a little bit about the nuance. So it is the things that say, this is a remarkable achievement. It uses these really fancy, like very impressive sounding words. Those are the things that you have to consider, the more nuanced components. Like, is it really that remarkable, or is it just a little bit interesting? Those sorts of things, and look at going to, Google or whatever search engine you use, the databases you do your literature searching in, and actually going to look for some studies that talk about these things that it's talking about and evaluating whether that is accurate. I tend to use it more for helping me write things that I've already written and I want to make better. So I've already done the research, the reading, the understanding of the topic that I'm talking about. And now I just want to make it sound better, right? And so maybe I ask it to help me write an additional paragraph to explain this concept that I'm trying to say. Because often, in your head, you're like, you know what you want to say, and you just can't get it quite right in words. It is great for that situation because you already know what it should say. It just needs to be in some words, and it can help you do that. So I tend to use it more for that purpose rather than it like completely giving the answers from the beginning, because that helps me evaluate and ensure that the content I use is actually accurate.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lynette. Ms. Ratna, is it clear?
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Everybody, please give a big applause for our keynote speakers, Dr. Lynette and Dr. Kamil Arsaniko. Well, I think we have to close the discussion session. And on behalf of FKIP Unila, Faculty of Education and Teacher Training, and Universitas Lampung, we'd like to say thank you so very much for our keynote speakers, Dr. Kamil, Dr. Lynette. Hopefully, we can get more insightful information, insightful research in the future from both of you. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's an honor, and we're so pleased for that. Okay, we'll see you again next time. Give a big applause once again, everyone, for our keynote speakers. Well, as moderators, I do apologize for the inconvenience or maybe some technical problems for our hybrid conference. We'll see you again next year, maybe in the 6th or 7th international conference. Okay, all right. And we will still have one more session, I mean, today in the afternoon, right after lunch break. Okay. Thank you so much. I'll see you again next week. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bapak Ibu, untuk semua peserta offline maupun online, untuk presenter maupun partisipan, kita ada break sejenak sampai pukul 10. Setelah itu nanti kita akan melanjutkan ke sesi paralel. Di mana sesi paralel nanti semua presenter diharapkan untuk bergabung dalam main Zoom meeting, kemudian nanti akan di breakout sesuai dengan roomnya masing-masing. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, selamat menikmati coffee breaknya untuk yang offline. Thank you.